Well, Chris Popper, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Gousse here at MDI High School, and first of the year. Last year you guys were kind of working, well, about 16 months, 12 months to 16 months on a long-range plan, and I know that was something that was important to you when you first came here, was to look at the system and develop some long-range goals, and I think you have done that.
Well, Happy New Year.
And to you.
And yes, it is important, but it predates me. It's one of the pieces that was being discussed before I arrived here, and so I was just fortunate enough to come in at a time when that work was begun. And it's actually a great way to acclimate myself to the communities and to the island. We've learned a lot. So
this was a giant listening tour.
Oh, it was huge, and there are things that you learn midstream or circle back to, but we undertook listening tour community forums in all of the MDI school communities. We had an online survey open for several months. We met with staff, administrators, and so last evening I was able to give the preliminary findings and recommendations for what we heard.
So what were they?
So, it's interesting because one of the things that I think we knew going in, but it was validated, is that we have incredible community support for our schools. People care deeply about these schools. And one of the themes that came across is that people like what they have. There's hands down is success in our programs, certainly academically and in extracurricular activities. People really appreciate the outstanding staff that we have. All of that was validated. People want to, there were a couple of themes that were most prominent that emerged, and they're not in any precedent or order, but one was pre-K, early childhood education.
Which is crucial.
It is, and if you think about it, as progressive as we are, it's not formally embedded into our programming here in the schools. So that was a theme people spoke to unilaterally as a positive, just in terms of they'd like to see it, but nobody came in with a pathway to say this is how you should do it. So we'll explore that. And I think to that point, whatever might be considered by the board or communities, we don't want to compete with any entity. I think we certainly would want to collaborate and make sure that we do this well and thoughtfully. The second piece that came up was middle school. And it's interesting because there were three themes that emerged around that. One was, go ahead.
The middle schools that you have currently right now are Connors Emerson, Pematic.
Well, we don't have a middle school.
Okay.
All of our elementary schools have they're K-8 programs.
Okay.
So the middle school concept, if you will, is embedded within those schools.
Okay.
So to that piece, people began to wonder, using the high school as a model, what's best for kids? There's the argument that small schools are best. I'm not, I wouldn't want to take that argument. But then there's the other side of that where small schools can be, and small class sizes can be limiting. And I think both are true. So the question becomes, what's the best pathway for those kids?
All right, when you say middle school, you're talking 6, 7, 8, or 7 and 8?
Well,
or
so that's another question, Chris. I mean, most people, when they think of middle school, they think grades 6 through 8.
Okay.
There are some schools that do, or districts that do, a 5 through 8 program. Anybody that considers a program like that, I would caution them to cluster kids grade 5, 6, 7, 8. But I think it comes down to what size and what vehicle you want to consider. But hands down, middle school is generally a 6 to 8 entity. Okay. Sometimes listed as a 7, 8, but that range.
Okay.
And so three themes or concepts emerged with that question. One, keep what we have. Some folks said, we like small schools, we know our kids, keep it the way it is. The other piece that came up was we should have an island-wide or an AOS-wide or a district-wide middle school because it's better for kids because there are things that we can't offer because of the small numbers. And then another piece that grew out of that was, what if we had two locations on either side of the island, or regions that we could cluster middle level education? So there were three core pieces, if you will, and I think those next steps are, now that that voice has been heard, the board can sit down and say, okay, what might we want to consider moving forward?
Okay. And obviously they're looking at it from a facility standpoint, a taxpayer standpoint. How many kids roughly are there in that 6, 7, 8 age group?
Well, so if you look at a cohort of kids generally, and you cluster the high school, you talk at a range of between 120, 140 students per class. If we just look at it in the aggregate, and I'm thinking, an entering grade 9 freshman class, but it's probably, as an entity, hovers around the 100, 110 number, because you also have to back out any kids that might come from Hancock, Lemoyne areas.
All right, so 6, 7, 8 would be then about 330 children. Yeah,
it might be a little less than that, but it could be within that. That's a good. It's a fair number to consider. So so the question of a 2-campus pathway, that has some merit. That could take traction. I think people start to get nervous or some folks start to get nervous when you talk about clustering a large grouping of kids.
Yeah. You have transportation issues as well.
Well, that was another piece. Certainly outside of the pre-K and the middle level, one of the major themes that emerged was also our operational side of the house, how we're structured for transportation, custodial, maintenance, and food service. Hands down, our folks do a great job in all the individual schools.
I want to make sure you stay in the camera.
Our folks do a great job in all the schools, but we're siloed in our work. So if we had the ability to have those types of programs be considered under an AOS envelope, there's more capacity for bulk purchasing, sharing of resources, networking, a lot of things.
What, in terms of the process, then, this would then have to go, obviously, to the individual town school boards, and then to the AOS board, or how does that work?
So there's a lot of layers to this.
Yeah.
So, the elephant in the room might be, so do you form an RSU? That was a question. That's a big question, and I think that's a question that, if that is a pathway to be considered, that's a community conversation. That comes down to a recommendation from the boards, from the AOS, back to the communities, community discussion, and a vote, and then you're talking about the collective bargaining agreement. So you really got to put that over here, because it's a huge question, and recent history on RSUs and consolidation in the state of Maine has not been positive.
No.
And it's not been positive primarily because it's been a forced march, and it takes away local control.
Right.
So if we've learned anything in recent history, I think, is the whatever you do consider, be really thoughtful about community voice and incentivize it, as opposed to making it a forced march. The AOS structure that we're in right now, as complicated as it is and as layered as it is, it's not broken.
Right.
It works, but it's complicated primarily from the financial and the budget process, where we have to develop 10 budgets, have 10 budgets approved, audited, and reconciled. So kids, teachers, community members, they don't feel that piece, but for the purposes of the schools and the programs, that's working. And people don't want to see that change, or some folks don't want to see that change. I think elected officials, administrators see it through a different lens, but that's a different conversation.
Right.
The AOS structure does allow us to consider some shared programming and services. And I think if the boards want to consider going in that direction, I've provided some recommendations and some pathways they can consider. And I think the way that shakes out is that over the course of the next few months, the board may consider to do a workshop or a summit, if you will, to think, okay, what pieces might we want to consider and tackle, and then how do we proceed? There are some things that are certainly within the board's purview that they could implement. There are some things that they may task administratively, and there are some things that they may even want to form a task force, go back to community members of schools and talk more about those things.
One thing we ought to reassure everybody, this is not something that would happen in September of 2018. I mean, you're talking a couple years down the road.
Yes, yes to the first part of that statement, which is nothing is going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
And nothing is going to happen to individual schools or within communities without conversations with communities and with boards. There are no changes on the table.
Okay.
That's number one. To say that nothing might happen within 1 or 2 years, I'm hopeful there are some things that we do within the coming year and the next 2 years. And I'll give you some examples of things that haven't impacted schools, but the board is already, through the leadership of the board, they've already undertaken. We had 10 different sets of policies when I first arrived here. We now have 1 set of policies. And that hasn't compromised any education or programs. So there are a number of things that can be done informally within our structure that don't take away community voice or the ability to shape who we are. The other example I would give you is that the work of Julie Meltzer in teaching and learning. For many, many years, schools operated as their own mini districts, and teaching and learning occurred in terms of what the staff determined was best for those kids. There's nothing wrong with that, but now we have a unified curriculum, we have unified professional development, evaluation, assessment, and when you look at the data, the needle is moving and we're making progress.
Well, as you're going standards-based and everybody's coming to the high school, it's good that everybody has
want to level the playing field.
That same base that everything's built on.
Which should be the goal, that no matter what community a student comes from, when they enter this school, they enter with a level playing field and an opportunity to be successful in whatever pathway they choose.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's pretty exciting. And the other piece to that is we don't have a strategic plan in this district. And for an organization as large as we are, it just makes good sense to consider strategic planning and make sure that whether that's a 5 or a 10-year plan, that we have a benchmark that we can measure how the progress that we're making and report back to the community. With a strategic plan, we give an annual report, but an annual state of the schools report can be delivered in terms of here's where we're at and here's how we're progressing. And it gives also community voice again on the direction the schools are taking.
Okay.
So.
Exciting times.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here, and as I mentioned before, outside of the fact that this is an engaging work, there's a lot of great things happening in the schools that I know you did a story on Bar Harbor with the National School of Excellence, the Blue Ribbon, but there's a lot of exciting things. I want to get you out into some of the schools and do some follow-up.
That's excellent. Now, there's also, I know this Friday, the high school seniors are doing their senior exhibitions. Yes. And I've written about that. That's a way for the community to become involved in.
Really powerful. It's a way for the community to become involved, engaged, and really see. It really brings to life and puts into perspective the application of that teaching and learning. And if community members have not participated either as a panelist or an observer, I would encourage folks we do that twice a year.
Yeah.
And this round is, and the projects that kids undertake, they're amazing.
Yeah, I mean, just the ability to stand up in front of strangers and talk without a lot of notes for 10 to 15 minutes is a huge skill that sets MDI high school students ahead of their peers.
I think I agree. You know, when I talk to business leaders, you know, and ask the question, you know, what are some of the things that you expect kids to know and be able to do outside of the curriculum and the math and the science? People talk invariably. They talk about soft skills, being able to have a conversation with somebody, look them in the eye, know how to respond, know how to deliver remarks. So those soft skills are really important, and in no matter what vocation somebody chooses to go into.
Oh, absolutely. All right, so we've got that. We've got, let's just also touch on this time of the year, everybody's favorite subject. We did a video solely on this, but cancellation of schools. And, you know, this time of the year, it's, I get kids that are texting me at night saying, do you think we're going to have school?
Yeah.
And
what do you tell them?
I say, wear your pajamas backwards. That's a sure way of making sure that you don't have school. And always do your homework.
Yeah.
But when we talked about it, first of all, ultimately it's up to the parents. If they feel that the roads are not safe, they should keep their children home.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, if we're holding school and a parent or a guardian doesn't agree with the decision, the ultimate call is theirs. I mean, outside of the fact that if we cancel school, I mean, we'd encourage them not to drop their children off.
Yeah, don't bring the kids here.
But if we're holding school and somebody's not comfortable, you know, there's no you're not.
Nobody's going to get in trouble because they didn't bring the child to school.
No, and you're not going to win that battle. You got to do what's best for your family and your child. Right. I get it. I had a call yesterday. You know, we did a delay, and the weather and the roads were less than. They
were marginal.
Yeah, and somebody called and said, "Are we having activities?" I said, "Yeah, we are." Well, I'm concerned about that, and exactly that. You know, you need to do what you're comfortable with.
Right.
We don't. Some people think that, well, when we do or don't have school, is it the number of snow days we've used? Honest, straight up.
Nothing to do with it.
It absolutely is. Now, I don't, in the back of my mind, I don't keep a count on how many days we have or haven't used. That's not even a consideration. The consideration is, what are the conditions, the road conditions? Certainly for kids that are walking or staff that are walking, you know, what are the conditions in terms of them getting to and from school? Those are the big deals.
And given the fact that MDI High School is a regional hub, I mean, you have a lot of tuition students. You have people coming from Trenton and Lemoyne.
Right.
So it impacts not only what the road conditions are, and you have staff that live off island. Right. Is how accessible is it to get onto the island, and then what are the road conditions on the island?
And those are all variables, Chris. So I've been in this business 35 years, and you know, in the time that I've been a superintendent, and I'm thinking back on my career, the regions I've worked in, hands down, this region, MDI, from the, you know, a meteorology standpoint, geography, is the most challenging place that I can think of in the state to look at cancellations, because you can literally have a storm, you know, on one side of the island, and it can be, you know, fairly decent weather on the other.
Right.
And then add to that the unbridged islands, Frenchboro, Swans, Cranberry. It's a whole different mechanism. And then go off island for a second to Trenton. And so we have a pretty wide variety of weather.
And as superintendent, you would rather err on the side of caution.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I learned a long time ago, when in doubt, you pull the plug. You don't gamble. And sometimes, you know, I think back to the October storm. There were some folks that were concerned about, why would you have school? Well, you don't try to make a decision to put anybody in harm's way, but weather is evolving and changing. But we use a variety of tools. We use National Weather Service forecasts. We use road conditions, road crews, multiple, and the process actually begins. I mean, if you're talking about calling or delaying school, a 5 or 6 a.m. message, the process begins 3 or 4 hours before that.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the night before. So it is involved and it is complex.
All right, perfect. It's a timely topic. It's one that everybody...
and nobody's going to unilaterally agree. It's nice when you hear folks say good call or good decision. That's affirming. And then, you know, when...
then you get somebody that says, I used to walk in snow both ways, barefoot up the hill, and why were the kids not in school?
Right. So we do the best we can, but as you said, with safety in mind.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Thanks for taking the time today, and
Chris, thank you.
We'll do this again soon. Thanks. All right, thanks for watching.